Today, the two new state portraits are being hung in the throne room at Buckingham Palace. And they were painted by two different artists. Peter Kuhfeld painted the portrait of King Charles III, and Paul S. Benney painted the portrait of Queen Camilla. State portraits are typically grand, full-length portraits that become the defining image of the new monarch. And they were particularly important in an age before photography. Often many copies would be made and circulated far and wide. State portraits typically follow a standard convention showing the monarch with the symbols of rule, so often a crown and the coronation robes that were worn during the ceremony itself. The monarch is often shown standing on a step, so raised. Sometimes there might be a pillar behind them, that's a standard convention, and perhaps a swag of a curtain. Before the portraits of King Charles and Queen Camilla were produced, the most recent example of a coronation state portrait is that by Herbert James Gunn, which is of Queen Elizabeth II and hangs at Windsor Castle. One of the most important symbols of monarchy is the crown, and the crown is often included in a coronation state portrait, but often it's not actually worn by the monarch or the consort, but it's set on a table to one side. Some monarchs choose to be painted wearing exactly the clothes they wore during the coronation ceremony, but some depart from that and might wear military dress, for example, but you always include one of the important robes. From the 16th century onwards, state portraits have been used to shape how we see royalty and how the monarch creates their own image working with an artist. The earliest example of a state portrait in the royal collection represents James VI of Scotland and I of England, and that hangs at Windsor Castle in the Queen's drawing room. Another example of a historical state portrait that you can see as a visitor to Windsor Castle is that by Sir Anthony Van Dyck of Charles I, again shown in coronation robes with the crown to one side on a ledge. We're standing here in the Green Drawing Room at Buckingham Palace, and behind me is one of the most recognisable state portraits. It shows King George III in his coronation dress, and this portrait was so popular and King George III so liked it that he asked the artist Alan Ramsey to make over 150 copies of this portrait to be circulated around the world, and one visitor to the artist's Soho studio described it as being crowded with portraits of His Majesty in every stage of their operation. And it really became his iconic defining image of this young king at the beginning of his reign. King George III is shown in his cloth of gold suit that he wore for the coronation. The Imperial State Crown is just visible to the right-hand side, and the robe of estate that's worn at the end of the coronation ceremony. We actually know that this robe was originally more purple, and it's become bluer over time as the red pigments have faded more quickly than the blue. A companion portrait of Queen Charlotte, King George III's new bride, was also produced at the same time, and copies were made of that as well. We have several versions of that in the royal collection, and it shows her as a fresh-faced 17-year-old, just married and recently crowned. When a monarch is crowned with a consort, portraits of both of them are often produced at the same time, and they're hung together as we're doing here today in the throne room. The most recent state portraits were painted by two different artists. The portrait of King Charles III was painted by Peter Kuhfeld, and Paul S. Benney completed the portrait of Queen Camilla. And as you can see, they're quite different in style and representative of each artist's own particular way of painting. The king is shown in military dress, but wearing the red robe of state, which is worn at the beginning of the coronation ceremony. And you can see the Imperial State Crown set on a table to one side, just as we see in the portrait of George III. Queen Camilla wears her coronation dress, which was made by Bruce Oldfield, and it includes embroidered flowers representing the national flowers of Britain, but also her two rescue dogs, Bluebell and Beth. Queen Camilla is shown with the robe of estate that she wore during the coronation ceremony, this purple silk velvet robe lined with ermine, and a similar example would have been worn by George III. So you can see in these two new portraits that they very much followed in the tradition of coronation state portraits that we see going back to the 16th century, but really presenting them for a new audience. And in an age of photography where we have so many images, portraits serve a different purpose, an artistic representation of the monarch and the consort. Both Peter Kuhfeld and Paul S. Benney are well known to the King and have painted portraits for him when he was Prince of Wales, a series of D-Day heroes and Holocaust survivors, and those portraits are also part of the Royal Collection. It's really exciting to have these new coronation state portraits being hung in the throne room at Buckingham Palace, and visitors to the palace can see them as part of their visit.